Hello, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Anna Hood, and my study was on the northern sea otter habitat suitability on the Washington coast. Sea otters were extirpated from Washington in the early 20th century. Their extinction in Washington was mostly due to the fur trade, but competition with growing fisheries was also a factor. In 1969 and 1970, 59 northern sea otters were translocated from Alaska in an effort to reintroduce the species to Washington. If you look at the map on the left, you can see the historical extent of sea otters compared with a historical range in fur trade in Washington along the coast. The reintroduction of sea otters to Washington has been considered a success. The species was downlisted from the state endangered status to threatened status in 2018, although there are concerns about the security of the population. The relatively small distribution of individuals means that the entire population is still threatened by even something as small as a localized event, such as an oil spill, that could eliminate the entire species, essentially causing it to go extinct for a second time in Washington. The goal of my project is to identify habitat suitable for northern sea otters to expand their range along the coast of Washington. The research question I developed this analysis to answer is as follows. How much Washington state coastline and surface water is suitable for northern sea otters? The methods I will use are ArcGIS Pro suitability analysis, and I will use data such as the bathymetry collected from Esri itself, as well as kelp and shoreline data from the Shore Zone Inventory Project by the Washington Department of Natural Resources via their open data portal. I'll also need to determine distance from shore, but this I will use a buffer tool for. So the first map I would like to share with you gives a good idea of what my study area is. It's outlined in the red box and also shown on the legend over there. This data is the relatively pre-analysis raw data. I've basically symbolized it so it's easier to pick out certain aspects that are going to be significant to the analysis. So the relative names of shoreline types and all those, it's not necessarily important to know what their inclusion in this map is simply to show the various kinds of shorelines that will have to be filtered through and selected for to find those that are preferred by sea otters. Also depicted in this map are presence and absence of floating kelp, which is necessary for sea otter habitat, and the absent is obviously not symbolized. The continuous and patchy locations are symbolized in black and red, and these are areas that the kelp canopy would be suitable enough for sea otters. That's just one of the aspects of this analysis, and it is really important. I'm going to open up the suitable shoreline identification workflow that I developed to process the raw data. As you can see, there's 3 groups that I have put together to determine different aspects, such as kelp presence absence. We have the original all kelp types variable here, which I obtained in a layer format, so I had to change it to a feature class. I also had to project and clip to make it usable for my analysis. I also had the raw data for shoreline type here at the very beginning of that group, which again was projected and clipped. From that data, the buffer of 4,000 meters from shore was created, and that number is significant because sea otters inhabit waters up to 4,000 meters from shore. There's different ranges in between there, depending on age class and sex class, such as adult males are usually the furthest from shore, whereas female juveniles are typically the closer to shore. None of that's necessarily important to this study because we want to be able to incorporate habitat for all demographics of the population. Just thought that would be interesting to share. And so the last group in this workflow image is the processing of the exported data. So I basically had to go into the attribute tables of both of these data sets and select by attribute for kelp presence and preferred shoreline types, and created new files that I then overlaid and erased the non-overlapping segments, which left me with one file known as the suitable coastlines. The buffer I created from the suitable coastlines is not important to this step of the analysis, but it is important further on. So this is the identified suitable coastline. It's symbolized in the yellow and overlaid with the preferred shoreline type and kelp presence that I was just talking about in the previous image of the workflow. I wanted to symbolize these all together and display them on a map so that it was easy enough to identify where these coastlines were selected from. So as I said earlier, the kelp presence layer was created by exporting only those features that had either continuous or patchy kelp present. And the preferred shoreline feature was created by exporting only features that were described as gravel or rock substrates. Sea otters don't tend to use areas that have sand or cliffs. I have included the identification workflow for this segment as well. It's exactly the same as the one before, so I'm not going to go over it. Here we have a bathymetry map that also includes the buffer that I mentioned at the beginning. The buffer is 4,000 meters from shore. The workflow for this section of the analysis is shown here. We have 4 groups. One that's included from the previous one is also the shoreline, which is where I got the buffer from. But that buffer is used to determine suitable distance. So as you can see, I used my topography layer. I had to rescale that to determine suitable depths. That's one of the features that I was unable to upload. But those depths were from 0 to 50 meters deep. That's the ideal depth for sea otters to forage within. They don't obviously go much above 0, and then below 50 is a little bit challenging, and I think that they aren't as successful. So that's why depths below 50 meters were excluded from the analysis. I then clipped that raster to the 4,000 meter buffer to identify only areas that were the suitable depth and distance from shore. From that, I created a potential habitat polygon by clipping, using raster calculator and raster to polygon tools. That polygon is right here. The initial polygon I created was the blue potential habitat polygon, but it included areas that were within the 2018 sea otter extent. So I once again had to use the erase tool, which left me with just the red polygon, which represents suitable surface water. The final bit of my workflow is shown here, where I, as I just said, subtracted 2018 extent from both of my potential habitat and suitable coastline features. And then I ran summary statistics, which gave me the potential habitat length and potential habitat area, which, as I said earlier in my research question, is the entire goal of my study. The results of those summary statistics is listed here. Coastline listed in blue and surface water listed in red. And the corresponding shapes also being present on the map below. For discussion, the current northern sea otter range could potentially double in size if all of the identified suitable habitats remain suitable and the sea otters are motivated to expand their territory. The constraints on sea otter expansion are mostly due to encroaching human development on preferred habitat, food competition with human fisheries for prey species, and climate change. Washington northern sea otter population has been steadily increasing, resulting in increased pressure on food sources, which will either lead to complete depreciation of prey species or dispersal of sea otters to locations that can sustain an increased population. Those locations could possibly be within the study or further south to the Oregon coast, as well as further north to British Columbia and Vancouver Island. Further research should consist of determining if the expansion of the northern sea otter range into my identified unpopulated habitat will provide enough spatial distribution to prevent extinction within Washington from a localized event, as well as research into the priority dispersal areas and what criteria contribute to certain locations being chosen over others. This might help us explain if they choose to transfer outside of Washington. Thank you for listening to my presentation. As someone who's interested in conservation of marine species, this research was extremely enlightening. And I've listed my resources here, and I hope I was able to convey something new and interesting to my audience. Thank you very much.